Professional wrestling is a sport for dreamers. For every Hulk Hogan, or John Cena, or Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, there are 1,000 meathead bodybuilders who never learned to work and didn't have movie star charisma, and maybe get as high as a Jim Powers or Paul Roma or Schnitzky before falling back into obscurity, thus failing in their quest for Vince McMahon to make them a millionaire. For every Rey Mysterio or Jeff Hardy or Zack Sabre Jr., there are 1,000 tiny gymnasts who never learn ring psychology or who think they're much better than they actually are at high flying and end up botching half their high spots, like a Sin Cara, for example. For every Undertaker or Kane, there are 1,000 supernatural gimmicks that fail miserably and are indeed remembered forever as goofy nonsense by the fans, a fate into which the aforementioned legends could have very easily fallen. My point is that for every type of wrestler and every type of gimmick, there is a wide spectrum of potential success. Every Undertaker has an Oz, every Goldberg a Heidenreich, every Vader a Mantar. And so I would like to introduce you all to one Rusty Brooks, a poor man's version of Mick Foley or Kevin Owens, or one of my favorite living humans, Otis Dozovich. Not only did he not have an athlete's body, no, Rusty Brooks did not have that Bam Bam Bigelow Samoa Joe thing going where, yeah, he was fat, but he looked like he might be a dangerous puncher. No, like Foley at times in his career, Rusty Brooks seemed to be actively, aggressively non-athletic. Like, he was literally trying to look as physically bad as possible. Look at this man. He is the answer to the question, what if Humpty Dumpty had a baby with a human woman? And yet, like Mick Foley, through a combination of being able to work, having a compelling heel persona, and having an outstanding sense of humor about it all, he was able to carve out a niche for himself and become beloved and, dare I say it, legendary in certain circles. And that, to me, is almost the most interesting part of this tale. I began this investigation by throwing on an old episode of Tuesday Night Titans and seeing an incredible jobber getting his ass whooped by Billy Jack Haynes and having a hearty good laugh at his expense. But then I googled his name and discovered that his story was 1,000 times more interesting than I expected. I began this investigation giggling at a man whose job it was to lose at the national level, and ended up having such tremendous and deep respect for a man who became a legend in his own market, out of his plain simple love and respect for his craft. This is a story that crisscrosses every level and some of the biggest names of the sports era. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of Rusty Brooks.
Brooks is having his problems in this matchup.
The man who would become the wrestler Rusty Brooks was born Kurt Koski in Denton, Texas, in February of 1958, though he moved to Florida at a very young age. Like so many fans, some of his earliest memories were of watching wrestling, often with his father. When he was a young man, he remembered seeing an article in the Miami Herald about Gentleman Jim Eisler, a grandfather who, quote, got his kicks in wrestling. So Rusty reached out to him, and he found himself a trainer. Now, Eisler actually managed our hero in a number of outlaw promotions throughout the region. An outlaw promotion, by the way, was one not affiliated with the National Wrestling Alliance, which did not recognize the lineal NWA World Heavyweight Champion. These were often staffed by wrestlers who'd been blackballed by the NWA, or were heading towards the ends of their careers. Neither of these described Rusty at the time, but that's where he was working at the time. Now, these promotions often didn't last that long because the NWA operated somewhat like a mob. They'd see one of these promotions come up and they'd send over a top star, they'd loan them a Ric Flair or a Roddy Piper, and that would tend to take away that outlaw promotion's business. But it was in Tampa in these early days that Rusty came into the orbit of one Boris the Great Malenko, and began working outlaw shows with him and receiving further training. In a wonderful demonstration of how different the wrestling world was back then, Brooks introduced Malenko to his father, when Boris was not working his heel persona, they were just in his house. He had described to his father how wrestling was kind of not entirely on the level, so to speak, but yet his father still greeted Malenko with balled up fists. His father still hated the dastardly heel. A bit later in his career, Rusty actually feuded with the Malenko boys with his tag team partner, Jumbo Beretta. Of course, the most famous name out of that group being Boris's son, Dean Malenko, of WCW and WWF fame, considered by many to be one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. Now, while he was there in GWF, Rusty occasionally worked with a man called Joe Mascaro, who had done some TV tapings for Vince McMahon Sr. Now, when Vince Jr. began going national in the mid-1980s, leading to the 80s wrestling boom, He expanded down south and worked a show in the Hollywood Sportatorium in Miami. After Vince Sr. passed on, Joe called Vince Jr. to offer his condolences, and before long, he was being invited back for more TV tapings. Rusty went along, and before he knew it, they were up there in Poughkeepsie, New York, meeting with Pat Patterson for additional TV tapings. Now, this would kick off the most famous part of Rusty's career as a jobber in the WWF. If he's Chumbawamba, this is his tub-thumping phase. If he's Dexy's Midnight Runners, he is smack in the middle of Come On Eileen. Now, he worked a laundry list of the biggest stars of the era: Ricky Steamboat, Paul Orndorff, King Tonga, perhaps better known as Haku or Ming, Billy Jack Haynes, Jake the Snake Roberts, Andre the Giant. He tells a great story of going up to Andre as a young green rookie in the business and asking him what he wanted to do. And of course, Andre is on his third 2-liter of wine at the moment and says, "Do whatever the fuck you want, kid." And then they went and had their match. And then they were cool after that, and Rusty became one of Andre's numerous boss-nicknamed folk. Of course, Rusty's job at this time, as it never would be for the rest of his career, was to lose. But he had a very good attitude towards the experience.
What do you think of the term you brought up, job guy? Do you get offended by that, or...?
Not really. There's a lot of different names. They call us enhancement talent, job guys, underneath guys. It's a job. Mm-hmm. We got paid very well to do it, so...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know some guys do take offense to it, but, it was a position and it was a spot. That's.
It turns out Rusty Brooks teamed with Mick Foley in the WWF when Foley was going by Jack Foley against the British Bulldogs. I promise you I did not know this when I compared the two at the beginning of this video, but the two did run into each other years later and reminisce.
This is how the business evolves and people change and you don't even know it, I'm sitting in the stands, and my son says, "Dad, there's guys who signing autographs. Can I go over there?" He's 10, maybe 12 years old. I says, "Yeah, go ahead, man." So he goes over, and he sees Cactus Jack, Mick Foley. And, he's waiting, and finally he gets up to Mick, and, Mick signs his paper. Mick's a hell of a nice guy,
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know it at the time, but, my son says to him, he goes, "Yeah, my dad wrestles." And Mick goes, "Oh, really? What's your dad's name?" And he goes, "Rusty Brooks." And Mick goes, "Son of a bitch," he goes, "we were partners once." So my son comes running over, and I says, "I don't know who the hell that is." And then it turned out he worked his, he and I put the Bulldogs over, the British Bulldogs.
But as Rusty Brooks almost lucked into his WWF career, he also backed into that career's biggest moment, when he would wrestle on television the immortal Hulk Hogan. Now, this may seem a bit strange to some of you younger fans, but back then you didn't see the champion on television every single week. He certainly never wrestled on television, and when he did, it was a huge deal. As much as modern fans get mad about the WWF's treatment of Brock Lesnar, that is the old school pre-Monday Night Raw treatment of a world champion. It was a special, big deal when they showed up. Now, the story of how this match came about is wonderful. Rusty Brooks went backstage at Poughkeepsie and ran into Chief Jay Strongbow, and he saw on the big board for the TV matches it was Hulk Hogan versus blank. Now, Rusty asked Jay if he could do it, and Jay said, "Yeah, sure, why not?" and put Rusty's name up there against the world champion. And so, Hulk Hogan owns a victory over the great Rusty Brooks. Now, working the Immortal One was one high point in Rusty's WWF career. The other would come when Tuesday Night Titans' May 2nd, 1985 episode would be dedicated to the promotion's, quote, unsung heroes, i.e. the jobbers. Now, I could not find any free footage of this episode of television, and I apologize about that. The WWE is nothing if not diligent in their copyright claims. How Matthew manages to keep Botchamania on the internet, I have no idea. But the Unsung Heroes episode of TNT is flat out glorious television, and I strongly recommend it if you have the ability to find it and view it. Here I'd like to paraphrase Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez's F4W Online website's write-up of the episode, which says it very well, and I quote, "Next up is Brooks, Jim Powers, and Jose Luis Rivera. Powers, of course, would go on to become Roma's partner as a young stallion. Brooks had great facials," talking about Rusty Brooks here. "He just looked pissed off and annoyed, while also insecure about his fat body. For most of his TNT interview segment, he crossed his arms to cover his massive belly. Brooks tells McMahon, I don't like to be considered in the same class as these two gentlemen here who have a long ways to go, referring to Powers and Rivera. Brooks says his record would improve dramatically if he got in the ring with these guys. Brooks, too, wants Heenan to manage him. With proper management, I think I could go all the way to the top, Brooks says. Brooks is just oozing heel here. If they put this guy in a black t-shirt with a slogan of "Fight Rusty Fight," this guy could have enjoyed a nice run on top as a heel opponent for Hogan. I would have cheered for him, and I think fans would have embraced him in a sympathetic way. But of course, as we all know, in time everything fades. Everything changes. Chumbawamba goes from worldwide phenomenon to weirdo niche anarchist socialist group. For everything there is a season. Turn, turn, turn. That's both from the Bible and some 60s band. Eventually, Rusty Brooks stopped working for the WWF. He says it was because he had a young child and couldn't take the travel schedule. And I, for one, am inclined to take him at his word. But this was by no means at all the end of his glorious wrestling career. Yes, for a good stretch of time in a Northeast promotion, our hero worked as, quote, Superduper Mario. Yes, after the Nintendo character. Now, to hear Rusty tell it, they came to him and asked him to do this when the Nintendo game got popular. And he was initially very skeptical, but he ended up getting into it and having fun with it, and kind of making it work. Turning chicken shit into chicken salad, as the saying goes. In one of those odd wrestling crisscrossing careers moments, he ended up working the WWF's Damien Demento and also future multiple ECW stars, including Tommy Dreamer and Taz.
So I go up, and we're sitting at a bar in off Commercial Boulevard down there, and here in Fort Lauderdale. And he says, "I got an idea for you." He goes, "I want to do a character with you based off the Nintendo thing." And I'm thinking, well, okay. He goes, Captain Lou Albano was doing, Mario.
The TV show.
The Mario thing. And I said, okay. And he goes, well, we're going to do a spin on that, and we want you to be Superduper Mario. And I'm looking at him, I'm like, how many beers have you had, Are you on crack? He says, you're going to come out to the Nintendo themes. And he goes, for the first couple of weeks, all he wants me to do is crush everybody. And he goes, invite the kids into the ring. Just have a ball with it. So now the whole time, I'm trying to figure out an Italian accent, So I'm talking like a super-duper Mario, I thought he sounded more like the Iron Sheik than I did Italian,
Now, as to whether Rusty sounded like the Iron Sheik in his stint as Super Duper Mario, well, I don't know, dear viewer. I'd prefer to let you decide. I'd frankly prefer to just let you watch this whole clip in its entirety, because that's how much I love Super Duper Mario, and this better time when wrestling was allowed to be a lot more fun than it is today, in its current form. In fact, to heck with the event center, we need to full screen this, in all its VCR tape glory. I want you to experience this thing in full.
Hello, everybody out there in the television land. This is a Super-Duper Mario. I got a few of the little messages for my bambinos. You all know that the school is going to be getting out soon, and we want you all to be careful so you have a safe and a pleasant summer vacation. I also got a message for my mama. She wanted me to say hello to Baba Dow, and she also wanted me to say to the Boston Cream Puff.
And look at the youngsters up there. They're pouring out from all four corners of this big arena. They have seen Super Duper on television many times, and they know how much he loves the children. And he certainly has got them around him now as they are coming again. They're emptying out all over this place to get next to Super Duper. A man that, I don't know, I just can't do it. Certain people you just can't help dislike or help like. And Super Duper Mario just like he can't find anything to dislike about the guy. Cheerful, gives great advice to the children. Of course, again, he's an idiot. He smells like a soap. Well, that's one opinion, but I don't think it's cheered by the millions of youngsters around here right now. Cheered by the millions of youngsters in my neighborhood, South. Super Duper Mario. I don't see anything super about Mario. Well, I tell you, the kid. All I see is a big fat geek. He's a spaghetti bender from, Naples or something? I don't know where he's from. I'll tell you, he is always with a smile on his face, always with good advice, and just never wants to hurt a flea. Look at that. Until he gets into the ring. Good clothesline. And he's taking on Jose Vasquez right now. Vasquez, he's getting busy. He may not think Superduper Mario is such a nice guy after this one. Look at the Super one. Now the little step over. So famous for Superduper. Here comes the splash. Oh, now he comes. Here's the cover. 1, 2, 3. It's all over. Superduper Mario. Here come all the youngsters.
That is one of the best wrestling segments I have ever seen, and I have watched a lot of wrestling. Just hook that shit to my veins. Just exquisite. Over the course of his career, one of Rusty's primary roles was as a trainer, and the list of folks he helped train is legitimately impressive. That list includes Luna Vachon, Gangrel, who is still working, Norman Smiley, who is one of the WWE's head trainers in NXT, Hulk Hogan's workout buddy Corporal Kirshner, and Connor of the Ascension. Thus, it should perhaps not surprise us that in his home market, the man with the "what if Humpty Dumpty banged a human lady" physique is something of a complete legend. And, dare I suggest it, well goddamn deserved. We here on the Jobber Chronicles salute you, Rusty Brooks, unironically. You had a dope-as-hell career, and wrestling is a lot better for having you in it. Here, I'd like to let some of your fans take it away.
Man, Rusty Brooks, a legend in South Florida wrestling. He's done it all. He's been to the big time in the WWF before he hit WWE. He is the guy that initially trained me. Rusty Brooks trained a lot of South Florida wrestlers and got some of the guys on to the big time. And what he means in South Florida wrestling is almost what OVW meant to WWE, and what Heartland Championship back in the day meant to WWE, and what almost now what NXT is to WWE. He was that guy for South Florida's wrestlers.
Angel, what has Rusty Brooks meant to you?
Oh, man. Everything, really. He taught me every single thing that I know.
Gotta ask you about somebody, Rusty Brooks. What has Rusty Brooks meant to wrestling, especially in South Florida?
There would be no wrestling training centers if it wasn't for someone like Rusty Brooks, who almost paved the way for guys like me to come here in South Florida and help the younger guys. So Rusty was very important, very important part of South Florida wrestling training, and we love him.
Of course, we are fortunate that our subject has this interview online, and we are further fortunate that the hosts were astute enough to ask of the great Rusty Brooks his opinions on modern wrestling. Take it away, Rusty.
I mean, I'm sure nowadays it's much more scripted, but I mean, back then a lot of the stuff was done on the fly, you know.
Yeah, which to me it adds a certain charm and makes it special. Like when you're not sure what's going to happen.
Well, I mean, I think it creates more for the boys, for the wrestling, because you have to be more involved in your own character development. Mm-hmm. And nowadays, everything is handed to you, and you're told to do, here's your lines. Back then, it was basically, it was up to you to make it work, and I mean, granted, it wasn't the push we'd have wanted up there, but I mean, it was still a chance to ad-lib and show that we could talk if we were given the chance, Well, I think I mean, as far as a wrestler or a talent goes, if you're given a gimmick or you're given a character, it's easier to understand it if you create it yourself.
Right.
When it's handed to you and you're just given a script, it's hard to get into it and it's hard to make it believable. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of the guys today is that, if there's a mistake or somebody misses a cue or misses a line, they're lost. They don't know how to ad-lib. And I think that's one of the biggest things missing in today's business.
My God, man, your lips to God's ears, you magnificent bastard. Think back to that description of Rusty on Tuesday Night Titans. According to his recollection, McMahon simply asked them the question and it was their job to answer in the voice of their characters. Nowadays, some asshole reject from Days of Our Lives would write shitty dialogue for Rusty, and we wouldn't be remembering it 35 years later. Now, Rusty Brooks is absolutely 110% correct. The primary problem with the modern WWE is its over-scripted nature. There's almost nothing raw, pardon the pun, improvised, organic, off the cuff. Promos feel like bad porn acting now, rather than an authentic expression from that person. Rusty Brooks for Wrestling Promoter of the Universe. Now, there is a postscript and legacy for our hero, as his son Jeff J-Dog Brooks followed him into wrestling and still works in Florida on the independent circuit. It's perhaps not that surprising the way these people's lives intersected, as Rusty promoted a show in 2004 worked by his son, J-Dog, pictured here, Norman Smiley, who he trained, Ryan O'Reilly, aka WWE's Connor, who he also trained, Vampire Warrior, the former Gangrel, who both he and the Great Malenko trained, and was married for 12 years to Luna Vachon, whom Rusty also trained. As far as we know, Rusty Brooks is still involved in training. He mentioned some health issues in a shoot interview, but his Facebook profile as recently as a year ago has folks referring to him as Coach. In an article almost a decade old now, he mentioned that he went back to training in his backyard because the economy had soured, and they couldn't afford the warehouse that they moved the school into. But they quoted a student as saying, "You come here because of Rusty. He's like a book of knowledge." In a sense, I find a strange comfort that Rusty Brooks has so settled into his role as a teacher of future wrestlers, current dreamers. It just makes a certain poetic sense to me. I believe that Rusty Brooks is at heart a dreamer. He looked at a business of jacked up muscle men, saw his tubby, balding self in the mirror and said, "I can do that. I can be that." And the thing is, he did it. He carved out a place and a legacy for himself in this business by being so good at everything else. And if you give me a choice between CrossFit-obsessed Seth Rollins or Randy Orton or Finn Balor, who hasn't eaten a carb since the 1990s, reading some stilted bullshit promo written by a soap opera hack on one hand, and on the other hand, you offer me tubby, balding, hairy Rusty Brooks, who is allowed to go out there and be himself and improvise and be entertaining and be his own character, well, I know what I want from my pro wrestling. For the Jobber Chronicles, I am the world-renowned historian. Thank you for watching, everybody. Be good, kiddos. I am out.